And it looks like we're live. Welcome to the Analytics Office Hours. I'm just going to check my phone very quickly here and confirm that we truly are live. Certainly appears like we are. Yes, indeed. Well, hello there, and welcome to the weekly Analytics Office Hours. This is a time every week where you can come and get advice for technical questions you're facing, whether it's something SQL related, Python related, Power BI, Excel, even other platforms. Whatever kind of problems you're facing, bring them to Analytics Office Hours. Same thing with career questions or even soft skills. Maybe you're wondering the best way to present something, or you have a question related to how you can lead better, to maybe open up some leadership opportunities in your career. Whatever kind of questions you have, analytics or data science related, I'm here each week, every Friday at 10 Eastern to answer your questions. So this Analytics Office Hours is for you. If there's something your company is facing, keep it high level. Do not include any personal information or anything sensitive about your company, because these videos will ultimately be posted online so that others who aren't able to make this time can view them as well. So keep that in mind. Don't include anything confidential to your company, to yourself at all. Maybe in some cases you can keep it really high level, whatever you're comfortable with being shared out there publicly. But I'm really excited to answer your questions today. So please go ahead and put your question in the chat, and I will do my best to give you a good answer. That's what this hour is here for. So I'll wait for your questions, but if we don't have any questions, I do have a prepared topic. We'll continue to talk about our analytics transformation assessment, which is kind of a good way to start the conversation about ways that you can improve analytics at your company. Maybe it's being able to do more by being more efficient, or do more by learning new techniques that are going to allow you to do things that maybe you're not currently able to do. So either way, we've got a whole analytics transformation assessment to answer questions like that. But I'm going to keep an eye in the chat, because if you have any questions, I'm looking at the chat and I'm going to answer those first. So I will keep that, keep my eyes on the chat. Again, drop a question in if you'd like an answer. In the meantime, though, I will go ahead and share my screen to show our website, valuedrivenanalytics.com. And just coming to the website, you can tell on the homepage that this analytics maturity transformation assessment is a big deal. We think it is a great value. It's actually free. You just click here to learn more, and it is going to take you to a quiz. About 34 questions. It should take about 10 minutes to go through. If you take this quiz, we are going to send you within a couple of days a PDF that scores your organization on a scale of 1 to 3 in terms of your level of analytics maturity. Wouldn't it be nice to know that, to know whether you're closer to 1, the lowest score, or closer to 3, the highest score, or anywhere in between? We will actually give you an answer to that. And not only that, we'll break it out by category, so you know which areas you're doing better in today, which areas you might want to focus on improving in. So you get that, but then again, if we just tell you that, you don't necessarily know where to go from there. You know where to focus, but then what do I do to improve that? We give you that as well. We give you specific recommendations based on how you answer these questions. We'll give you feedback on how you can improve as an organization. It's a really great value, a customized PDF report for your organization just by taking 10 minutes to fill this out. It's a great value. It could put you on a course to transform your own organization, or you may decide that you want a partner, someone who's seen analytics at a lot of organizations across a lot of industries and functional areas. You want somebody who's used a lot of tools to partner with you and help you figure out what the best tools are for your organization based on your needs. That's where value-driven analytics comes in. So if you want to do this on your own, you certainly can. Use the free resources on our website. This is just one of them. The quiz is a very good resource. We also have, if you go over to our blog and then specifically analytics consulting, we have a 7-step roadmap that'll show you the 7 steps that we walk through in order to lead an analytics maturity transformation. That's another good resource. Similar to the assessment, you can either go through these 7 steps on your own, I highly recommend them, or you might decide to partner with someone who's done this a few times and has the analytics expertise and also the change management skills to really lead a successful maturity transformation at your firm. So we have several resources for this. All right, with that being said, now that we've kind of introduced that, and we've talked about this quiz in the past as well, so this is nothing new, but what we're going to do is go through some of the questions that we haven't gotten to yet. So we've gone through several questions here about your high-level analytic strategy, analyst performance, how to ramp up analyst performance from a ability to do flexible data manipulation and flexible data task, as well as efficiency, how quickly you get those done. And so we have a few questions here on this page that talks through that, and then we talk about analyst engagement, how you as a manager or someone part of the management team can make sure that your analysts are engaged. And boy, is that a critical piece to achieving an analytics maturity transformation. If analysts are not bought in, they're not really excited about coming to work and improving, it's going to be really, really hard to advance in analytics maturity. So we have a few questions about that. And again, if you take this quiz, you get recommendations as well on how to improve in these areas. But these are things that we've talked about in previous office hours. So if you want to dive deeper into any of these topics, check out our past weekly analytics office hours. We have a few questions around reporting at your organization. Are you doing it in Excel? Are you using an interactive dashboarding tool like Power BI or Tableau? Certainly recommend that. Automating your reporting, making it interactive, making it self-service, speeding up those times to insight so you don't have to wait on an analyst to filter on the data for you. You can just do that right there in the moment, and now the analyst team has more time to pursue proactive advanced analytics. There's so many benefits to taking your reporting out of manual platforms like Excel, moving it into an automated interactive tool like Power BI and Tableau. So again, all things we've already talked about. We talked a little bit last session around analysis and data science at your organization, what tools you're using, and also what kind of techniques and strategies you're using methodology-wise when it comes to building data science models, and what some good ways are to do to build data science models are, and some things to look out for as well, some common pitfalls. So I believe where we stopped last week was getting to the data accuracy and availability at your organization. Okay, so we're going to start with question 21 here. And again, I'm keeping an eye on the chat, so if you have a question, put in the chat. I'm going to stop and I'm going to address your question. Technical, soft skill, career question, company maturity question. Don't include anything sensitive, but I'm keeping an eye on the chat. I'm going to answer your question if I see one in the chat. Okay. How long does it typically take your organization to create and schedule a new data table? Well, most of the time when an analyst or someone, it usually starts with someone in the business. They have a request, and so they're probably going to the analyst. Maybe they have a stakeholder model and there's an analyst assigned to them. That analyst is then going to either know exactly where that data lives, it exists today. Hopefully in a lot of cases that's the case, and they can do the analysis. There's no other dependencies other than themselves. And then as soon as they get that done, they turn it around and share it with the stakeholder. They can make a data-driven decision from there. Easy as that, right? But what if that table doesn't exist? Maybe there hasn't been a need for it in the past. Well, now when the analyst gets that request from the stakeholder, they're going to most likely be going to IT to ask IT to build that table for them. And that process, depending on the organization of having IT create that table, can take some time. In some cases, could take more than a month. A lot of cases, almost every organization, I would think would take more than 1 week. That's been my experience by default. In some cases, the data actually already exists, but it needs to be processed in a certain manner. Maybe some data needs to be combined together into a data table, and it needs to be put in a new data table for maybe some kind of reporting process. And so if you're relying on kind of maybe it's a 2 week sprint schedule or something, best case scenario, you're probably going to get that new data table you're looking for in 2 weeks, and then the analyst is going to take some time to do that analysis. We had some conversation about speeding up the analysis time and how an analyst, most projects, typical project, should be able to do of those or so in a week. That's really good if you can do 3 or more in a week, and talking about different efficiency tactics so that you can do that. But still, you've got maybe a 2 week sprint schedule to get that IT table set up. And then from there, you've got the analysis time on top of that. Well, what if you could create some kind of a reusable asset that would allow you to create data tables, especially if the data already exists and it just needs to be combined together in a matter of not just a week, not even a day, potentially an hour or less. You're just writing the SQL query and then you against these different tables, and then you're saving the result to a table or a view. And it's as easy as that. There are techniques that you can employ to do just that. And so sometimes I think the reason this can take so long is analysts, and maybe even IT as well, looks at these problems, each table that needs to be created in silos, rather than taking a holistic approach and saying, we write a lot of SQL queries, and each one of those SQL queries, it writes to a certain table, and the table name is different. What if we could just parameterize this where we just create a folder of SQL queries, and it has the name of the table we want to populate with that SQL query in the file, or maybe that's the file name, and we have a process that just loops through this folder of SQL queries, this folder of text files with SQL queries and table names, and it processes it and it saves it and it updates that each day. Or maybe if it's a view, it's just is a view. So the views are a way of accomplishing this as well. But you have a process that does this whole thing, and this can work even sometimes if the data is not available in a SQL table. There are Salesforce APIs, for instance, that can get the data out of Salesforce from objects. And so imagine instead, if you need a new Salesforce object put in a data table, instead of just creating that from scratch and saying, okay, let me find out how to find a Python API to pull that, and let me schedule a special job just for that Salesforce object to save it to a data table, and you're just doing that just treating it as a completely separate project where you're starting from scratch, that probably will take you several hours, a day, maybe even a week or longer. But if you've set up a process where maybe there's something called, I think it's Salesforce SOQL, maybe it's very basic, similar to SQL language that Salesforce has, and this is just an example for Salesforce, that you can write to extract fields from a particular object. So you could have written a Python job that's scheduled that loops through maybe a folder with text files in it, and each text file just has an SOQL query. So the next time you need a new object in Salesforce saved to a table, you would just add a new text file in this folder. That's all you do with the SOQL, which is very basic. Select star from this particular object. If you needed all the fields from that object, you just drop that in, and now your process is automatically going to pick that up and start saving it to a SQL table. And so now you've got that object in SQL. It's going to update every day. You can even set up error notifications around it. This is a great strategy for now taking that process, that time to create a new data table with a new Salesforce object. You've taken it from maybe days to just, perhaps in some cases it could be as little as 5 minutes. That is how you get quicker. That is how you get quicker with analysis tasks and you're able to do more. That's how you create tables quicker. So just one idea. And really, when we broaden this concept even more, we're talking about creating a reusable asset. We're taking a step back and thinking about, wow, we spend so much time on, in this case, creating tables, or it could be building models. Can we take a step back and think about the common denominator across all these tasks and create something that either fully automates it or semi-automates it? And when you think about creating a reusable asset, there's two things to think about. What part can be absolutely automated? Maybe it's different for different cases, but it's something that we can use if statements for and check for and do something different, a different set of operations depending on maybe whether the column is numeric versus categorical. And then there's other things that, yeah, that probably is going to be the part that does change. And so that's where you'd have some kind of a template. Maybe it's parameters set at the top of your code, if it's a modeling reusable asset perhaps. Or perhaps it's an Excel file and it's, okay, populate this with the things that change, but then from there, we've got a Python job that's going to import that, loop through, do all the things in the manner that's very similar, that's coded out, because this is the automated part that is the same across all these requests. And so you can usually take a step back, think about where you spend most of your time, and look for opportunities to either fully automate or partially automate that. You do that enough, that's how you get your job down to maybe 20 hours a week. So you've got 20 hours a week remaining that you can use to pursue proactive, advanced analytics projects that you really believe are going to have a big impact on the business, or pursue proactive leadership initiatives. Areas that you've identified, whether they're in analytics or not, that could help the business, again, be more successful. So you proactively identify, lead those. You do that enough, you do that well enough, pretty soon when there's leadership opportunities that open up, they're going to have you in mind. All right, well, I think we've talked enough about the idea of speeding up your time to schedule a data table. All right, next question here. How often do you experience attention to detail issues that cause data or insights in a report or analysis to be inaccurate? Oh boy, nobody likes attention to detail issues. These are so important to avoid. It impacts your reputation. Of course, nobody's perfect, and that's why you see the best answer I guess you could select here is 0 to 2 times per year per analyst. In my experience, that's a pretty good analyst. If over the course of a year, especially 0 or 1 time, you've maybe sent out data, especially if maybe it didn't result in a bad decision, it wasn't terribly off perhaps, that nobody's perfect, and so that's not too bad. If that's pretty good, if you can especially 0 or 1 times, maybe 2 times, that's not bad. No one's perfect, but when you start to get into 3 to 5 times per year, that's not great. And especially if it's happening 6 or more times per year, once every 2 months or so on average, that is really not good, especially if you're presenting things that are just obviously off and perhaps things that are actually resulting in bad decisions. That's not good. It is very likely, if you're in this range, 3 mistakes per year, or especially 6 or more mistakes per year, it's very likely that what's happening is you're not doing a great job of checking your work. That's most likely the symptom. Again, nobody is perfect, and that's why if this happens 1 or 2 times, it's probably just a sign that we're not perfect. But if it's happening more than that, there's ways to reduce the likelihood significantly of sending something out without errors. So we go through several of these in a video we have around improving your attention to detail. We have a whole video on that. But a few of the techniques, first and foremost, this applies not just to analytics, before you send something out, before you present something, double check your work. And you know what? If it's really important, if it's going to have maybe millions or multi-millions dollars of impact, depending on what your analysis suggests your company should do, maybe you even triple check it, right? So check it to the extent of the importance of that particular project you're working on. But at least do a double check. Look over it a second time. And boy, I know just whenever I check over words, paragraph, I usually find typos or some grammatical errors that I didn't find that I wrote initially. But when I read that second time, I definitely discover those. Same thing applies to analysis. So that's one, double check your work. When it comes to doing analysis, one of the biggest things that throws off an analysis is duplicate issues. If you're doing SQL, it can happen in all kinds of platforms, but somehow you've done a join and it inadvertently duplicates maybe all of your data, but at least some rows. Nothing throws off an analysis like duplicates. So you've got to look out for that, especially in SQL. One thing to look out for is when you're joining to a table, when you're joining in a second table, you've got your starting table and your from statement, you're joining in a second table, and then you're joining it on a particular key or field, you want to make sure that that second table that you're joining in is one row per whatever that thing you're joining on is. If you have a sales table and you're joining it to a customer table on customer ID, you need to do a count star to figure out how many rows are in your customer table, the table you're joining in. That's going to maybe be 100,000 customers. And then you also want to count distinct whatever you're joining on, in this case, customer ID. And you want to make sure that that's 100,000 too, that there are 100,000 distinct customer IDs, whatever you're joining on, in this case, customer ID. And if those two match up, there are no duplicates in the table on customer ID. There's not multiple rows for the same customer ID. A customer ID can only exist in that table one time. Now, that doesn't mean that there's maybe cases where there's a customer ID in the sales table that's not in the customer's table. That's another thing to maybe look out for. And if you do an inner join, you might lose some records if there are some customer IDs in the sales table that aren't in the customer table. So another thing to look out to, but boy, the duplicates, that's how you check for duplicates. Count star, total number of records. Does that compare to the count distinct on whatever you're joining on? If so, there are no duplicates in that table and you're not going to create any duplicate records when you join in that table. But if there are, if you find that the count distinct on whatever you're joining on is less than the count star of that table you're joining in, then that means there are some duplicates and that there could be some duplicates generated when you join that in. Now, some cases, when you're joining in, you're okay with duplicates every now and then, but most of the time you don't want duplicates. And so be mindful of that. Check for that when you're joining in a table. Make sure that that table you're joining in is truly one row for whatever you're joining on. Very important. Duplicate issues, probably one of the top reasons that an analysis is thrown off and ends up being inaccurate. Well, another technique here is just to apply validation checks, or sanity checks, you might call it. You look at the analysis and you say, does that make sense? I mean, at first, just, hey, I don't even know anything about this company or organization or data set. Does this data set seem to make sense, or is there something that just looks really off here? If you're looking at a time series and you suddenly see a huge spike that's just, all the other time periods are nowhere close to that, that's pretty odd. Doesn't mean it's inaccurate, but you definitely want to look into that if there's any surprising results. But then, especially if you've been with an organization for a while, you may be familiar with this topic, and so you may look at something and say, that goes against conventional wisdom. I've heard that we've been doing pretty well, but this would suggest that we're not, based on this trend I'm seeing. That doesn't line up with my history, with what I've heard, with maybe what I've seen in previous analyses. Maybe we need to dig deeper into this. So if it doesn't line up with your history or what you've heard or seen in the past, that doesn't mean it's wrong. Maybe you've discovered something really unique or something that's changing in the business. Great, that's why we do the analysis. But a lot of times that could just mean there's some kind of an error as well. So it just means you need to double, triple, quadruple check when you're seeing those surprising results. Another option, another kind of form of validation, is to check your work against maybe another analysis or dashboard that exists. If I'm doing an analysis on sales, maybe I've been asked to do it on a particular customer, for instance, and looking at that customer sales. I might say to myself, well, this I don't actually have a dashboard, let's say, out there that has sales visualized over time where I can filter on a particular customer. Maybe I do. And if that's the case, great. I'm going to that dashboard. I'm filtering on that customer. My data should exactly match that at that point. And if it doesn't, I know something's off and I need to look into that, figure out that difference. In other cases, you may say, no, this is a really specific analysis and I don't have a dashboard where I can get down to this level. Maybe you have a sales dashboard, but it doesn't go down to the customer level. I'll tell you what, just go to your query or whatever you're using to get this data, relax that simple filter for customer or other things that you're not able to do in a particular dashboard. Just relax the where statement maybe, where you're not filtering down on a customer. Look at what your results are, your sales figures. Make sure now that those high-level sales figures tie out with that high-level sales dashboard. If they do, great, you're good. Now the only thing that can go wrong is just the where statement. So maybe do a double check on that when you comment it out. Make sure it still looks good, but now you're ready to push it out and feel pretty good that you validated the high-level sales figures. That's a great way to validate when maybe you don't have a dashboard that lets you get to the exact segment that you're looking at for the analysis. Just check it at a high level, relax your filters. If that ties out, great. Only thing that can go wrong is what you've commented out. Uncomment those out. Double check that part. You're probably good. All right. So we've talked about a few already, but believe it or not, there's still a few more. If you want to, as we talk through all these checks, if you really struggle with attention to detail, it may make sense. If you're in this bucket making, attention to detail issues every couple months or so, you probably want to really focus on this and maybe make a checklist so that you don't forget some of these things. And before you send any analysis out, you're going through all these steps. But the last step I wanted to share with you is around peer review. And this is good in so many ways. You might create kind of a schedule where you show your work. You don't want to go to the same person each time, right? That's going to bog them down. It's going to get annoying really quickly. And you can learn more if you go to different people and talk to different people over time. And so for one project, think about their expertise too. You might go to one person who's an expert in that area or that platform that you're using. And then for another project, another platform, maybe there's another person who has a comparative or absolute advantage. They're really good at that platform. And so you go and talk to them for the separate project, or they know that area really well. But you do your analysis and then you get a second set of eyes. You could either email it to them or set up a quick time for you to walk through the analysis and get their thoughts on. This is especially good for the methodology. You double check your work. A lot of times you're looking maybe for coding errors or things that don't make sense. But what if you just missed the boat from the very beginning? The methodology that you set up for this analysis or this data science model was not very robust, rigorous, and it's probably going to be hard to discover that. I mean, again, even your methodology, you might double check that and think through, am I missing any factors? Am I not controlling for something? Is there perhaps some just pure correlation that's happening here and it's not causation? You're asking yourself those questions, but it's going to be really hard to maybe figure out that you have a poor methodology. You only know what you know. But a second set of eyes can detect things like that. They'll detect the other errors maybe in your code as well potentially, but this is a great way to really assess your methodology and do a double check on that. So you show the work, email or meeting, they give you feedback, and then hopefully get good feedback and you incorporate it. This is a great way for even the peer reviewer, if they say, well, actually, I mean, your analysis looks great, I don't have any feedback for you. Maybe they learned something, a new method that they can use in their area of expertise where they work. in the future. So that's another benefit of peer review. And then, of course, in a lot of cases, they will have feedback for you. And now you have a new piece of methodology that you can use on that analysis you're working on and even future analyses. So peer review is really important. I think we don't do this enough. I don't know if it's just pride or maybe just lacking the time. We get in such a hurry. We just want to get the analysis out there. That is always that's probably the number one reason that we run into data issues is because we get in too big of a hurry. So it's good to take some time to slow down, especially, again, we go back to the importance of the analysis. If it's a really important project, definitely prioritize peer review and all these other checks especially. Now, there is a point at which, and I've seen this before, where someone maybe does so much validation checks. I mean, there's an unending number of validation checks you could do that it really does impact your efficiency significantly. Maybe, and again, if you're at this 6 or more times per year, you have attention to detail issues, that's probably, you probably still need to have those checks. Don't stop doing those checks, especially if they've been helpful. But especially if you're running a lot of checks and you are in this 0, 1, 2 times per year making mistakes, you might periodically assess all the checks that you do. Maybe you have created a checklist and think about, for each of those checks, how often have those checks really helped you identify an error? Boy, if I hadn't done those checks, I would have sent out some bad data and I wouldn't have even known it. We would have made a bad decision. If that's happened in the past and a check has helped you figure that out, oh boy, by all means, keep running those checks. Those are effective checks. But if you periodically reflect on these checks you've done and you say, I always do that check on every analysis, and it takes a lot of time, especially. And every time I do the check, it always passes. I've never flagged an error using this check. You might consider stopping doing that check. It's impacting your efficiency. Now, maybe again, if there's a really, 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 really important analysis, it's going to have millions of dollars of impact on this one. It's really important to get this right. Maybe you do that check for a case like that. You just pull all the stops, the whole list. But for other cases, especially if it hasn't really been that helpful in flagging errors in the past, you stop doing those because they're hurting your efficiency and they're not really helping the accuracy. So periodically reflect on those checks that you've done. Now, before I move on to the next question, I just want to take a pause, encourage you to put your questions in the chat. I'm keeping an eye on the chat here. And if I see any questions in the chat about technical matters, about platforms, about your career, soft skills, communication, leadership, project management, whatever you want advice on, that's what this time is for. So I'm just walking through the analytics maturity assessment here. We're having some good discussion around how to take your organization's analytics capabilities to the next level. And we were just talking about accuracy. So I'll continue to walk through these questions on the quiz. If we don't have any questions in the chat, but if I see any questions in the chat, I will stop and answer those because that's what this time is there for. So feel free to put your questions in the chat. All right, next question here until we get another question. How often do database issues impact data availability? So before we were talking about kind of errors that happen in your analysis. Now we're talking about database issues that are more downstream, but they impact your data availability. So in my experience, when I see, again, no one's perfect, and so things are going to happen. A lot of times it's not even a person's fault. Maybe it's a system that is down. And so maybe less than 5% of the time data is unavailable. That's not bad. Even if it's like 5% of the time, that's maybe creeping up there where it's becoming a problem. But honestly, in the grand scheme of things, that's not too bad. That means 95% of the time or more, you've got the data you need. The rest of the time, there's a delay. And especially if you've got a good notification process where people know the 5% of the time. So they're not making decisions on bad data. That's key. If you've got that in place, usually usually, less than 5% of the time, data not being available, having to wait, and you know that it's wrong, that's pretty good compared to a lot of companies out there. If it's unavailable 5 to 15% of the time, that's starting to slow you down. That's going to be annoying. That's going to slow down productivity for analysts and management alike. And then this is really bad. If your data is unavailable or inaccurate more than 15% of the time, again, ideally, you've been notified in those times so you know that there's an issue and you're not making decisions on bad data. But if it's happening that often, even if you are being notified, that is really slowing your organization down. And honestly, if it happens that often, management and stakeholders are probably wondering if the data is bad even when they're not notified. They're still probably constantly questioning the data. And ultimately, if they don't really trust the data, they're probably not going to make as many data-driven decisions. Makes sense, right? They're going to rely on their gut instinct of, ooh, the data's suggesting this, but more than 15% of the time the data's been off. This is counterintuitive to what I think we should do based on my gut instinct or my past. I'm going to go with my gut instinct because I just can't trust the data. If it lines up, then great. I'll maybe feel a little more confident. But if the data happens to go against what I was going to do otherwise, and I have seen that the data is often off for one reason or another, yeah, I'm going to question that, and I'm probably not going to make a data-driven decision in that case. So it's important to have your database up and running on a regular basis. And if it's not, there's a couple of solutions. Again, number one, you need to let people know. And if they've really been notified on time, maybe the morning that something happens and you notice the data's off, if they're being notified consistently, then maybe they do feel very comfortable that, well, I know that if the data ever is off, I am always notified. But if there's been times where, sometimes I'm notified, but there's been other times when I wasn't notified and it took a day or two to figure it out. And then I had to realize that, for the last 2 days I've been making decisions on bad data. That's where the trust starts to erode. So how can you address that? We'll create a system of checks, automated checks, that's every day, maybe multiple times per day, looking for things in the data, especially things that have been off in the past. Learn from that. Put in checks so that proactively someone's being emailed. A whole group of people, maybe the whole company, or at least decision makers that use data on a regular basis, are being notified when certain checks don't pass. Most likely, you'd probably email like an analyst or an IT person first, and then they'd have a process of maybe looking into that, taking a little time to look into that, but then very quickly making a call on whether to email out your big distribution list. You have a distribution list set up to email all the stakeholders that use reporting, for instance. Let them know that something's off. Provide an ETA if you have one. Let them know what the cause is if you know what it is. As much information as possible that makes sense at that point. But even if you don't have all the information, send out a notification that the data could be bad. Avoid using it. We'll keep you updated and keep them updated and let them know when it's resolved, when it's truly been checked and verified that it's been resolved. But that all starts with an automated system, just a job that runs on at least a daily basis that checks for abnormalities in your data. We were talking about duplicates earlier. If you've had duplication errors in the past, check for duplicates. And if it ever comes up again, checks for that. If there are duplicates, it sends an email to your point of contact. Or usually, you want a set of contacts that can look into this in case people are out of the office and such, and looks into it. And if it really is an issue, emails out that broader distribution list of all your reporting stakeholders. That's table stakes, just good notifications. Well, the other thing that allows you to do is it allows you to fix the issues sooner if you're being proactively notified about those things too. So then you have to wonder, why does this happen more than 15% of the time? If this is happening more than 15% of the time where the data can't be trusted, most likely that means you're probably running into, at least sometimes, some issues that are recurring. It happened before, it's happening again. Maybe it's happening again. That's where every time you see a data issue, don't just assume that it's never going to happen again. You need to do a root cause analysis. Figure out what caused that and put in a system in place to stop that, and what we were just talking about, a system in place to check for that and to notify you proactively if that ever happens again. Learn from the past. Also anticipate the future. If you anticipate that something could possibly go wrong, you just think through all the pieces, the source system feeding to the data tables, feeding into maybe some views, feeding into reports, and you think about all the pieces, and especially for your most critical reporting that everybody relies on to make decisions on, especially those, you focus in and you think, man, what could go wrong here? And you create checks to look for those things proactively. If you think something could go wrong and it's really important to get it right, you proactively put in a check. But definitely, if you've experienced an error in the past, put a check in place for it. Don't just assume it's never going to happen again. And that's going to help you get into closer to this less than 5% of the time bucket. All right, we'll go to the next question here. Does your organization have a customer data integration process in place? Sometimes this is called master data management. It's a similar concept, and there's other terms for it as well. But essentially, it's a process that matches customer records together across source systems into one consolidated global customer record. Okay, so what we're talking about here is you might go into a store, and maybe there's a few stores in the area, and the next month you go into another store. And when you check out, maybe they ask for your name, or maybe they don't, and they're just trying to match records together based on your credit card or something like that. Well, maybe you give them one name at one store and a nickname that you use in another store. Or maybe they spell street with ST in one database, or fully spell out street in the other store when they enter your information. Or maybe they misspell something, your name or the address or the phone number or the email. They misspell something at one store versus another. Or you use a different credit card at one store versus another. Then you go online to their website, and you're online using your desktop, and then you're online using your mobile, and maybe you're on their app as well. All the same company that you're interacting with. But you have all these multiple touch points with them, and maybe the company, maybe they buy third-party data as well to try to really customize the marketing to you, and your name just looks completely, or your address is different there too. And in some cases you've got a phone number, in some cases you don't, in some cases you've got an email address, in some cases you don't. In some cases all you have is an email address and you don't have their name. How do you take all these sources and bring them together to just be able to say, this person had all these touch points with us. They bought this at this store. They bought this at this store. They visit us online here. They looked at these things. They went to this app and they did this. Some people might consider that to be creepy, that you're being tracked. I get that. But a lot of customers, I think, at least for the ways that they've interacted with you, I think they expect you to know that you're the same person, and expect to get more customized marketing, or more customized product recommendations, perhaps more customized messaging as a result, right? Especially in this, the digital transformation that's happened over the last, continually, basically. People expect a lot of people expect to get customized marketing, customized analytics and recommendations for them. But if you don't have a customer data integration process in place, maybe you've just got something really simple where you say, I'm just going to select everyone with this name or this name and address. You're going to miss that when they've spelled the address differently, or used a nickname, or had misspellings. All those cases that we discussed, you're going to miss that, and you're not going to see the full customer journey, the full customer experience. And as a result, you're not going to have as good information about a customer when you're making a prediction or building some kind of a customer model. You're maybe even going to spend more money marketing because you don't realize that these two people are actually the same person. And so you're going to send them multiple touch points, maybe that say the same thing. Or you're going to send them a touch point, someone who you want to buy something, and you don't realize that they actually already bought that at another store. Wouldn't that be embarrassing to send out some kind of a promotion, or maybe it's online retargeting, asking a customer to buy something that they've already bought. I mean, come on. A customer is going to look at that and say, this company doesn't know. It might put some doubt in their mind of how, I don't know, robust of a company you are, right? If you can't get that right and keep track what they've bought and what they haven't. So a good customer data integration can use probabilistic matching to bring those customer records together. And now you really have a good 360-degree view of a customer, even if maybe they misspelled something one store and used a different nickname at another store, right? It's able to use the common information and use probabilistic matching to match them together. So you have kind of like a global ID that maps all of these individual system IDs together. You can use that to get that 360-degree view. So we have a whole article on our blog about this. So if you're interested in that, it's just go to automated data processes on our blog and customer data integration if you want to learn more about that. All right, well, just checking to see if we have any questions in the chat here. If you've got a question, please leave it in the chat. That's what we're here for, to answer your questions. In the meantime, we're walking through our analytics maturity transformation here. Now we're on to sales reporting and analytics availability at your organization. So all about supporting the sales team with these questions. And the first question we have here is, how are your organization's overall sales goals? Sometimes organizations refer to this as annual operating plan, or AOP. How are those overall sales goals set? And there's a few things that I've seen in the past. One is management kind of chooses a number that seems appealing. Most likely they're considering the past, of course, but they kind of say, we want to maybe grow by 10% this year, and so we'll shoot for that 10% over last year. That sounds like a good goal. And then in some cases, it gets a little more sophisticated. Maybe finance takes, again, starting with last year's sales, not a bad place to start, and then adds in some adjustments for just a expectation of the impact of certain programs. This is what we did last year, but this year we're planning on investing in marketing and investing in these programs, and maybe they've guesstimated how much of an impact those are going to drive. If they've done them in the past, they might be able to do a more accurate assessment of really an analysis of the impact of every additional marketing dollar. And so if we're spending this much more marketing dollars, you can really translate that into how many sales you should expect. So perhaps there's that level of sophistication, or again, it's just kind of a guesstimate of, well, this program's going to be big, or we're going to spend a lot on this and we expect it to drive this many sales, so we're going to add that to last year. Now that's kind of dangerous to do it that way. Something you need to think about there is, well, technically last year you did the same thing to some extent. You were spending a certain amount of marketing, and you were doing a certain number of programs that you expected to have an impact. If some of those programs you're going to stop, you probably need to make those negative adjustments as well, unless you just can expect them to have a continuous impact on your sales at the same level. So it's more about, I guess you would want to consider additional programs for this year, especially if you're going to be spending maybe more on marketing than you did last year. Yeah, perhaps then you bake in and expect some more sales. So think about, if you are going to expect more for certain programs this year, should you really expect more sales from those this year than you did last year? If it's about the same amount, or maybe even less programs than you did last year, maybe you should expect flat or negative sales in that case. So compared to what you've done last year, if you're going to start with last year, compare it and bake in programs. Make sure you factor in the fact that you've been doing programs in the past, perhaps. Okay, well, here's where we would recommend at least starting. It could be a financial analyst or just somebody who has some time series modeling expertise, a data scientist, building a time series model that factors in your seasonality, your trend, any other relevant factors. So yeah, if you've got some new programs that you haven't done in the past, and you're really going to ramp those up and you're continuing past programs, maybe you do add something on top. But start with a time series model that's able to essentially say, based on the trends we've seen recently so far, at the time we're making our AOP, setting it, here's kind of the trajectory we're seeing. And in the past, this is what normally happens next. And then a lot of times when you create an AOP goal, you want to split it out by month. And so you're able to use historical seasonality to determine how much of that goal you should expect in first month of your fiscal year versus the second month, third month, and so forth. So the time series model is able to figure out the seasonality based on the past that you should expect and set good goals throughout the year. And if that's not done well, let's just use a really simple model and say you take your annual goal and you just divide it by 12. Maybe that first month, maybe January, if you're an ice cream business, you probably don't have as many sales in January, let's say. And let's say that's the first month of your fiscal year. So here you've got this goal that's been your annual goal divided by 12. That's going to be a really high goal for January. And you're maybe going to miss it and say, oh, man, this is terrible. We're at like 50% of our goal. And then summer comes and you really exceed your goal. So a good data science model, a good time series model is going to look at your historical seasonality, and it's going to take your annual goal and it's going to put more of it in the summer months and less of it in the winter months, probably, if you're an ice cream business. That's just one example. But it really gives, and maybe in that example, a lot of people will say, well, that's okay. I'm good. I want my team to feel like, they've got something they need to catch up. I'd rather them be at that point than to be kind of underneath it. But ultimately, if people cannot trust the index, you might call this the indexing of your goal throughout the year, they're just going to assume that they're good, right? Well, yeah, we're down. And I don't want to be down in January against my goal, but I know that we're always down in January. And so, we're good, right? It's not a big deal that we're down. That's where they're going to go eventually if this has happened and you set the goal like this repeatedly. So they're might be down, and maybe they're down more than they should be based on seasonality, and it doesn't set off those alarm bells because they just assume that they're always down in January relative to the prorated goal if it's just divided by 12. So the alarm bells don't go off. They don't know whether they're down more than they should be. A good indexing model set with a time series model here, like ARIMA or Holt-Winters or exponential smoothing, it's going to really give you an accurate assessment of where you should be in January in order to achieve your annual goal. And if you're above that, good. You're doing good. You're on pace. If you're below that, you need to catch up. You're off pace. So ultimately, I think what I would recommend is just get an accurate assessment of what your goal should be, a really accurate one based on history, and set your goal based on a time series model. Well, the next question here related to how you can support the sales team with analytics is, how is your organization's overall sales goal distributed across salespeople? So now we're talking about taking that goal, maybe it's been split out by month, you've created with a time series model perhaps, or however you've created it, regardless of which method you've used here. Now you've got a sales force, and most likely what you want to do is take this goal and distribute it across your sales force. Maybe they have geographic regions, or sales forces are structured in all kinds of ways. Maybe it's based on different customer segments. But you've got to come up with this high-level number. You've got this high-level number. You need to distribute it across salespeople to set goals not at the high level, because ultimately you're going to want to say, well, okay, now we're 1 month or 2 months into the year. Here's how we're doing overall. Okay, great. Who's doing well and who needs to catch up, right? If we're doing well, why are we doing well? If we're not doing well, where do we really need to focus? Maybe some salespeople or some regions or some customer segments are doing great, even though overall you're not doing well. But how are you going to dig into the performance if you don't have a goal, a reasonable goal, fair goal set for each one of your geographies and your customer segments? That is where what we would recommend is like a real quota model. a data science algorithm that parses that out. But some cases, it's just the discretion of the sales manager. Maybe it starts at the top, and your high level sales managers are given a goal. Maybe the CEO or the high level sale, the overall sales director or VP splits out that, and maybe they're just doing it really basic at the discretion of the sales manager. Again, maybe they're starting with last year's numbers for each region and saying, well, I think this area is going to grow more, this area should grow more, and hopefully they do that in a fair way. Maybe they do just start with last year's numbers and scale that up to this year's number evenly across all the territories. And that may seem fair at a glance, but even there, we'll maybe talk about how that could be improved. But when you leave this up to the discretion of sales managers, and they have discretion on how they distribute it, a lot of discretion especially opens up the door potentially to favoritism, right? We hope that that wouldn't occur. We hope they'd try to do this fair, whatever methodology they'd use. But that's just another reason to just go with a data-driven model that takes that part out of it. So again, another method here that would probably be better than discretion of the sales manager would basing it on last year's sales for the same time period coming up. So that's good. If we're setting up a quota, it could be on a quarterly or monthly basis. Why not start with last year's number for that territory? And then you have the question of, well, what if the territory's changed over the time? Do you base it on what the territory looked like last year or what it looks like this year? Probably what it's going to look like for that coming up time period is probably best. But that time period coming up, you maybe take that number from last year. A lot of people realize that seasonality impacts their business. And so that's very common for people to start with last year. And if you're doing this on an annual basis, if you're setting a quota for the whole year, that probably is fair. You don't have to worry too much about it at the time of year because you're setting it for the entire year. How you parse it out, how you index it might change. But a lot of times you're maybe setting it for maybe the next quarter or the next month. And in that case, the seasonality does make a difference. So again, they might start with the same time period that was coming up that we're predicting, that we're creating a quota last year for that time period. And that's the starting point. Again, maybe they scale it up to this year's goal by the same amount. Well, here's the thing. Sometimes imagine a territory that last year, let's say, we're in February right now, let's say we're predicting for March. For each territory, we're going to use March of last year, March of 2022, and that's going to be our starting point. We'll scale it up to this year's March goal. Easy enough, right? What about the territory? Let's say this territory, March of last year, kind of going along at a steady pace, and in March it was a pretty steady pace. Something happened in April, May, June, sometime since then, that has really caused that territory to take off. I mean, it's doing double the sales, and it's not a seasonality thing. This territory has grown dramatically. Maybe you had a really successful salesperson, or it was driven just by something else that's happened. Anything could cause a territory to take off, or the opposite. Maybe they're seeing half the sales. And again, this is not a seasonal change. This territory is dramatically different. Think about what happens when we just rely on last year's data. Well, let's just say it's really taken off. It's double the sales, and it's consistently been double the sales. And that happened in April. And we're setting the quota April 2022, and we're setting the quota for March of 2023. If we start with March of 2022, that was before the territory really took off, we're going to end up setting a really low quota. And that salesperson is not going to have to do anything to hit it, right? I mean, it'd take a dramatic decline that we would not expect for them not to hit their number. Is that really what you want? Some people might say, well, the salesperson, they really worked hard and clearly, I mean, their territory's done great. It happened in April or May of last year, but they've done really well, and so they should continue to reap the benefit of that, right? Well, maybe. Depends on how you set up your compensation model. If the person is compensated fully for that increase that they drove in April, May, June, and they're really compensated for that, for the level of difficulty, the rarity of that, and the value it contributed to the company. That's what I would recommend. They were fully compensated for it during those time periods. And then the expectation resets now that they're at a new level. You were, again, absolutely fully compensated. That's part of the compensation model that might need to be adjusted. Then that's what I'd recommend. But even if maybe the compensation model wasn't set up like that, and so you have this argument of, well, yeah, they should be able to reap the benefit at least for a year, let's say, and that the year's kind of arbitrary, right? That's why I would say compensate them for the increase they saw at that point in time. But coming back to why you still need to think about this, what if that person who drove that increase, let's say it was driven by the salesperson, doubled the sales in April 2022, that person did so well that they were promoted, or for some reason they're no longer in that territory, and you have a brand new salesperson who just came into that territory, or came into that territory maybe 6 months ago or something. They inherited that territory. They didn't even drive that growth. There was already this doubling of the territory size that already happened. And so if you're starting with March of 2022, when you set their quota for March of 2023, that new salesperson gets a free pass. A really low quota. There's no way they're going to go below that level based on this growth they've seen sometime over the last 12 months. But they inherited that territory. And so they're going to hit their number very easily. It's not a challenge at all. And that's why what we recommend is basing your quota model, the distribution of your sales across salespeople or customer segments, based on a data science algorithm that factors in recent trends. It looks at, well, no, this territory for a while now has been doing this higher volume. It considers seasonality as well. And then it looks historically, it doesn't just say, if you see this kind of exponential pattern, you do not want to assume that continues. That's a good way to make sure that your good salespeople leave, right? Because they're just punished for doing good, and eventually they just can't keep that up. No, what you want your quota model to represent is if the average salesperson took over this territory, this is the level we should expect from them. That's what you want your sales quota in a way that scales up to your overall goal. And so what you'd want to do if you are seeing this exponential trend is go back in time and say, when we've seen this exponential trend in a territory in the past or among a customer, what normally happens next? And a lot of time, maybe it's not that it continues exponentially. Maybe it actually levels off or continues at a slower pace. But you build a data science model that learns from the past and is able to say, based on what you've been given, the territory you've been given, here is what historically happens next. That's how we would recommend setting a sales goal. And it doesn't just look at last year, it looks at recent trends as well. So that if you've had a big increase in sales in a territory, it factors that in to create a realistic goal, but also a good challenge of a goal for each salesperson. And if you're going to do that, you need to make sure that if they really exceed in one quarter, you're going to reset the expectation the next quarter. So you need to make sure they're fully compensated for that benefit in that quarter if you're going to do that, right? That would be our recommended approach there. Well, boy, we had a lot of discussion here. We still have maybe a question or two here as well on how we can support the sales team better with analytics, drive an analytics transformation that helps our sales team, a very important team for an organization. So it was good. It was good to talk through this and also how to ensure accuracy in the data, reliability of your data in your organization as well. So I hope you enjoy this. If you were able to join us today, please consider joining us for future Analytics Weekly Office Hours. And if you're watching a recording, consider joining us next time. I hope you have a great day today. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you next time.